Episode 1 of Prime Target begins with us in Baghdad, Iraq. Baida and her daughter Amira head out to get some ice cream. Baida leaves the girl in the shop while she gets some cash out, but suddenly, an explosion rocks the street and sends Baida flying. Miraculously, Amira is still alive, but the ground gives way, and both she and Baida go tumbling down into the depths. In Cambridge, England, we meet Edward Brooks, who's wrapped up in his work. He's a mathematician and not particularly great with people, especially Fiona, who clearly has the hots for him. He isn't really interested, although he does like that she's 23 as it's a prime number. During his math lecture, he's pretty pessimistic while Professor Robert Mallender is talking about the wonder of math. The university obviously needs funding, explaining his pitch to the other students, but in private he looks over Ed's research paper and isn't impressed. Robert is obviously good with his math work, although it soon becomes eerily clear that Ed is being watched on the cameras. By who? Well, we'll have to wait and find out. Meanwhile, another teacher, Andrea, is over the moon when she finds out about the gas explosion in Iraq, the same one we saw at the start of the episode. Not because of the bombing, of course, but because it's revealed a hidden underground chamber from the 9th century that's almost untouched. The Baghdad Department of Culture and Antiquities want her to fly out and investigate. Now, Andrea happens to be Robert's partner, and she encourages him to try and see eye to eye with Ed. Math is everything to Ed, as we've seen from every time we cut back to this guy. He's always writing in his notebook, and he's not particularly sociable either, although he does get on well with the male bartender whom he sleeps with that night. Afterwards, though, he's very cold with the guy and forces him out while he works. He's not entirely wrong when he says he has family coming over, although that may be stretching it a bit as he goes to have dinner with Andrea and Robert the next evening. There, he discusses numbers and, in particular, how it's a voyage of exploration. Andrea is impressed and shows off the work from the underground chamber from Iraq. Ed checks it over and immediately realizes there's a number pattern on the walls. The picture Andrea has isn't distinct enough to see the whole pattern, but whatever's here, they've stumbled on something massive. Some of the reason why Ed is getting under Robert's skin stems from his pure passion for maths. According to Andrea, it's just like her, although we can't be certainly exactly what this means right now. However, we do know that both Ed and Robert are being watched, and as they scroll down the numbers and try to work out a pattern, an invisible force is watching and snapping photos of their work. Speaking of invisible forces, when Ed speaks to Robert the next day, he theorizes about prime numbers and exactly what they may have found. He believes that there's something called the God Cipher, and the underground chamber in Baghdad is actually hiding a prime formula. Robert demands Ed drop this, refusing to go to the board with this research. He doesn't want it to consume him like others have been, and he races back home. It turns out Robert appears to be working with these shadowy people, because when he boots up the computer, we see a message from someone called the Keeper, asking why he's working on prime numbers. Robert's little slip-up to Ed about others working on prime numbers sees our protagonist do some research online at the university's computers. He notices that other students who have also worked on prime numbers have all had their research papers removed from the records. When he heads back to his dorm, Ed finds out that Robert has been inside his room too, taking all of his work and burning it. Ed is angry and heads to his house, where he finds Andrea just as dumbfounded. Robert leaves a message saying goodbye, apologizing for not being able to do more. As we cut across to the professor, we see that he's inside his car dead. Episode 2 of Prime Target begins 4 days ago, and this time we follow our other main character, Taylor Sanders. Much like Ed, she's consumed by her work, and that happens to be watching the professors at the university. Turns out she's the one that's been spying on Robert and the others. She's a surveillance officer for the NSA, and she soon slips into the cliché of showing a new recruit around that arrives to do the job. They're part of the European unit, and they're looking to root out the next digital weapons. They're actually monitoring 15 key mathematicians across Europe, which includes Robert Mallender. They have the capacity to plant or access any camera, but their surveillance is basic. They don't get audio, only picture, and their job is to upload any pictures from whiteboards, rather than actually deciphering the math work. Of course, as our digital world is designed around numbers and patterns, the right combination could, theoretically, take down the entire system. This explains what they're doing here and why this cipher is so important. Back in the present, Andrea is grief-stricken over Robert's death, while Ed is more interested in getting his research from the man's office than anything else. He's not allowed in there right now, but of course he doesn't listen and breaks in that night. He doesn't find anything, but Ed does get caught rooting around by the faculty and is warned by the other professors that he'll go down for this. Reprimanded by the authorities in charge, Ed refuses to apologize for what he's done. As a result, he's kicked out the university. However, he does find a picture of an icosahedron up on the mirror, which could be a big clue. Apparently, the Greeks believed this described the shape of the universe. Ed could be onto something, and he heads off to see Andrea, who brings up that Robert burned the tablecloth he scrawled over in episode 1, and Andrea believes Ed has found something. He's being warned off from everything, and both of them are determined to find the truth. Remember the girl from the past that struck a chord with Ed? Well, this was a mathematician by the name of Sophia, and she was close with Ed. Quite what their connection is remains a mystery, but we do find out that Sophia commits suicide 30 years ago. Ed and Andrea are understandably rattled by this revelation, and back home that night, Ed receives a visit from a strange man who's apparently looking to develop their work. He works for a company called Kapla. Taylor, meanwhile, believes Ed and Robert could be key components here, especially when she watches Robert burn his work and then commits suicide in the parking lot. This rings alarm bells, and she brings her boss, Olson, in to watch the footage. Despite it all being chalked up to a suicide, Taylor isn't convinced. She thinks there's more to it than that, and soon realizes they've been focusing on the wrong guy. They need to go after Ed. Taylor believes that Robert's voice on his suicide note has been artificially generated. The background appears to have been looped, given she hears coughing, and thinks they're witnessing a cover-up. Olson agrees to look into this and contacts his bosses to try and find out more. Unfortunately, they don't go for it. Taylor is not happy when she finds out and outside by the dock, demands Olson allow her to talk to those at the top. Unfortunately, she's asking way too many questions as Olson is shot dead by a sniper. Taylor tries to run away, but a man on a motorcycle chases her, so she dives into the water. While scrambling for safety, forced to get away from shady mercenaries, we cut across to the sniper, who happens to have a wolf insignia on his gun.